Get a clock here. My name's Polly Pistol, and I'm an alcoholic. By God's grace, in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink since April the 11th of 1977, and for that I am eternally grateful. I have a home group, and that's the Third Legacy group in Bellingham, Washington, and we meet on Monday night at 7 o'clock. So if you're ever in Bellingham, Washington, please give Dave and I a call, and we'll take you to an AA meeting. And the good news is that Dave and I are in the phone book now. You know, when you get sober, you can be in the phone book. So we're in the phone book, so just give us a call and we'll take you to an AA meeting. I have a sponsor, and my sponsor has a sponsor. And those are the things that I need to be a member in good standing in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, what keeps me sober is working the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the concepts that have been laid down for us in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And through that, I found a God of my understanding. And my relationship with God on a daily basis is what allows me to have one day at a time a sober day. And I got sober in Texas. And there's a lot of old rednecks in Texas, a lot of tough guys, you know. And a lot of what they would, you know, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that we get a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And what they used to say to us is, what is that you don't understand? A daily reprieve. Which means I cannot live today's sobriety on yesterday's recovery. I've got to do today's recovery. And I'm really grateful that I've been given that kind of AA. And I want to thank the people that are responsible for Dave and I getting here. And the first person I want to thank is Jack Gallagher. And I know you guys know Jack Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher, you know him. I've known him for about 22 years. And he's absolutely a fabulous friend. So thank you, darling. And I'd like to thank Jack for sending me the letters and keeping up with me, and me calling him and asking him all kinds of questions. I can't seem to keep my book straight of what I'm doing where. So I thank you, Jack, for being so patient. And I'd just like to thank the committee and all the hard work. This is really a fun conference. This is a great conference. So if you don't know that, those of you who are in Rhode Island, this is a really good conference. A lot of energy here, a lot of people involved, a lot of good food in your hospitality room, just all kinds of goodies going on. So thank you very much. Honey, you did a great... Where did my husband go? He found Susie over there. And Dita says she thought you were her date. Anyway, I'd like to thank my husband for sharing last night. And thank you, Dave. Margot for sharing this afternoon. Thank you so much, Margot. I love Al-Anons. Absolutely love Al-Anons. When I was 5 years sober, it was those Al-Anons who picked up my bacon at that point in time. And the play, all the guys in the play, you were fabulous. We were laughing and laughing, so thank you, thank you. Woohoo! And you guys are going to have a huge treat tomorrow morning because you'll get to hear Linda. So I'm so excited to be here, so thank you very much. And what I'd like to tell you today, at 32 years of sobriety, just for a couple more weeks, and then I'll be 33, I absolutely love Alcoholics Anonymous. We were laughing last night at dinner, and Jack says we were talking about AA junkies, and that's what we are, AA junkies. And somebody says, well, you told me one time that you're addicted to AA, and I said, if you've got my personality, you're going to be addicted to something, so it might as well be AA, because we're going to addict to something. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love the life that Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. And today, at 32 years of sobriety, I am busier in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous than I have ever been. I sponsor more people than I have ever sponsored, and I'm into more service than I've ever been into. And I have a really, really selfish reason for that. And that is, at 32 years of sobriety, I have so much to lose if I don't stay sober. And the other thing that I've learned is that I believe this with all my heart, because I believe the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about that the disease of alcoholism is a progressive illness. And if that is true, and I believe it to the depths of my soul that that's true, then at 32 years of sobriety, I am more alcoholic than I ever was when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So at 32 years of sobriety, I don't need to be doing less AA. I need to be doing more AA, because I have alcoholism worse today than I did 32 years ago. So I'm so grateful that I truly know that I know that to the depths of my soul, because I know that this disease kills. I watch it kill too often, time after time after time. This disease kills, and it must be treated, and it must be treated on a daily basis. But what happens when we stay around here for a little while, the ego starts to repair itself, and we think, if I don't go to this meeting, or if I don't do this, or if I don't do that, I'm going to be okay. Well, see, I never know when I'm not going to be okay, because I have the disease of alcoholism. So if I know that if I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to keep getting what I'm getting. And I really like what Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. And it doesn't mean that life hasn't been in session, because it has. And as I tell my story, you'll see that life has been in session. But what happens is a person who could not suit up and show up for life, I have been able to be present for my life for the past 32 years. And for that, I am so grateful. I am living, breathing proof that you can be a real alcoholic as described in the doctor's opinion in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and not come from the disease of alcoholism. I do not come from the disease of alcoholism. Now, I've heard, take an alcoholic's family tree and an alcoholic will fall out. If that's true, then it could possibly be my mother's father. However, he never drank like I drank, but he was the only one in our family who drank. I was not. My parents did not drink. My daddy died at age 60. He was 60 years sober. My mother died at age 87. She was 87 years sober. My parents were never impressed with my sobriety. Their deal was that if you just didn't drink, all those things wouldn't happen to you. I think I better get a little water. And I really did not even know an alcoholic until I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not know another alcoholic. I'd seen movies like The Days of Wine and Roses and I'll Cry Tomorrow, but I didn't feel like I was them. And so what happened was is I knew nothing about the disease of alcoholism when I entered the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I truly believe there is a genetic component to the disease of alcoholism, if I can get my tongue working here, because even though I don't come from alcoholism, I seem to produce alcoholics. So I do believe that there is a genetic component to it. So what I want to talk about with my childhood, because I read a book once about Clarence Snyder and called How It Works. And the author starts off this book saying that there seems to be two things that cause alcoholism: people who are loved too much or not enough. And if that's the case, I was the loved too much. I was a child who was very, very loved. And I'm an only child, so my parents gave me all the love. But what I have learned today is that you cannot give that which you don't have. And I've learned that from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I learned is my mother and daddy wanted to give me everything they didn't have. And I was a latchkey kid when it wasn't even popular. In a few months, I'm going to be 70 years old. I will guarantee you, when 70 years ago, a working mother was not that popular. And my mother was a working mother. And so I was a latchkey kid, which was something that was very different. But my parents wanted to give me what they didn't have. Both of my parents had been abused children. And just like an alcoholic or an Al-Anon, they found each other. And what they tried to instill in me was self-confidence, self-worth. I mean, they sacrificed their lives to give me gymnastics and dancing lessons and all of this, because my dad had a 9th grade education. My mother was educated. She was a nurse. But my parents, they were money makers. And so whatever they did was a sacrifice. But what happened is I know today that they did not have any self-worth, and they couldn't give it to me because they didn't have it. And that's what I understand today. My parents didn't drink. I truly believe, it is my theory, because I don't know for sure, but I believe the only difference between my dad and I is he just forgot to take a drink, because he was in every way like me, and I became like him. And that was, my dad was full of rage, and he would get so angry that he absolutely could not control himself. And my dad never once laid a hand on me, but he'd knock my mom around. And all of this, today I know all of this stuff played a part. Did not give me the disease of alcoholism, but it played a part in how I felt about life and how afraid I was as a little girl and all of those kind of crazy things. I know that had something to do with it. But today what I also know is whatever was inside of me, I had a soul sickness from as far back as I can remember. And it certainly was not because I was not raised in what's called in the South a really good Christian home, because I was. And I was carried off to church twice on Sunday and Wednesday night. And I knew about God. And I can guarantee you I was terrified of God. And I was raised Southern Baptist, right down in Texas, where they took the Bible Belt and gave it an extra pull. I knew about God. And these preachers would stand up at the podium and, they'd slam their fists on the podium and they'd scream and their faces were getting red and their veins would stick out and they'd scream out into the congregation, "If you've thought it, you've done it." Now, if you're an alcoholic in the making like I was, you think a lot. And it was just, I had this vision, and I could just hear, these things. "You're born a sinner, and you're going to burn in hell." And I just could, I was terrified of God. I figured there was nothing you could possibly do in order to be good enough for God. And so what happened is I was afraid. I was afraid of God. And I knew that He would, anything you did bad, that you would pay for. And I even believed that other people paid for my sins. Like bad things would happen to them because of something I was doing. This is just the craziness and my perception of what I heard there. Clancy has a tape out, and I love this tape. And it's called Alcoholism, a Disease of Perception. And I'm not sure what they said in that Baptist church, because I go to church today, and I can guarantee you they're not saying those things. So I'm not sure if that's what they said or not, or it was just my perception of what they said. Because I know today that my perception of reality is distorted, because I don't hear things the way they really are, and I don't see things the way they really are. That's just my perception, because I have a disease of alcoholism. I need to suit up and show up and hang out with you guys a lot, because you keep me in touch with reality. Because without you, I've got a head that is not my friend. It is not my friend. It's going to tell me a whole bunch of lies all the time. And I need to hang out with you, because this thing talks to me a lot. And I don't know if normal people, I just wonder if you would sit down and say to them, "What did your head say to you today?" And they would just kind of look at you. But we get it. We get that. That's just everyday stuff with us. We get that. At any rate, what happened for me is I was a loved child, but I did not know that or did not feel that until I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I could not feel that love. And today I understand. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous explains that to me. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that I am suffering from a spiritual malady. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that if I am suffering from a spiritual malady, nothing is enough. You cannot love me enough. You cannot do enough. You cannot give me enough. There isn't enough. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that if we are suffering from a spiritual malady, nothing is enough. And as Bill sees it, he talks about we are separated from the sunshine of the Spirit. And that was what I was. I had a disease of the soul. And today I understand what that solution is for the disease of the soul. It's the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that led me to a relationship with the God of my understanding. Because if I have my soul filled up with God, then everything's enough. It's enough. When I was 18 years old, I married an Air Force officer. And I just knew that I had found my knight in shining armor, and we were going to sail off into the sunset and live happily ever after. Now, I have been a person who has never wanted to be responsible for myself. And if the truth were known, I still don't. I would much rather Dave be responsible for me. But Dave's an alcoholic, and he don't want the job either. So Here we are. And I grew up in the South. And somehow, here I had a working mother, okay, when nobody's mother was working when I was a little girl. I had a working mother. But somewhere in my head, I got this idea that men were put on earth to take care of women. And I'm telling you, I knew what would make me happy. Money, men, and mansions. That's what would do it. That's what I needed to make me happy. Now, I have married this military man, and I don't really know a lot about any of that. All I know is he's really cute in that uniform. And I tell you, even today at this age, when I see a guy in a uniform, they're really cute. Really cute. So what happens is here I go off, my ripping 18 years old, and we head off to our first duty station. And what comes to me a few days after we get there is this invitation in the mail. It is addressed to me, and I open it up, and it's an invitation to a coffee given by the base commander's wife, and stamped on that invitation in big red letters is mandatory. And now, I haven't had a drink of alcohol yet, but I am a person who has never, ever felt like they measure up. Now, I'm telling you, I am so different than that little 18-year-old girl. I can tell you today. There is nothing in my whole background that ever prepared me to stand behind a mic like I am today. Nothing prepared me for that. That only happened when I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am the kid who's so sick and gets so upset just to give a book report. I can't do it. I have to skip school, I have to do whatever, because I'm so terrified. And I always have these feelings of inadequacy, like I will never, ever measure up. I'll never be as good as you. Those feelings. And as every time I talk to another alcoholic, most of them have the same feeling. So what I've learned in this program is I'm certainly not unique. I am very typical. So my case is not different. Most of us all feel the same way. So here I know things, okay? Alcoholics know things, even if they're alcoholics in the making. They know things. And I hadn't even had a drink of alcohol yet. But I knew that I would never measure up to these women. I'm 18 years old. I do not have a college education. And I am certain that all of these women are going to be educated and sophisticated, and they're going to know things that I don't know. They're going to know about fashion. I don't even know which side of the dinner plate the knives and forks go on. And all of these people are going to know these things, and I'm not going to know them. And I am so overwhelmed with feelings of inadequacy, I can't even breathe. And I go to this coffee, and all of us little second lieutenants' wives are sitting out there, and this base commander's wife stands up here, and she commences to tell us what we're going to do to enhance our husband's career, how we're going to have the right dinner parties, how we will attend the right dinner parties, how we will attend these functions, we'll wear the right length gloves, all the things that we will do to enhance our husband's career. And I am sitting there, and I am so overwhelmed, and I know that there is absolutely no way I can do this. There's just no way. And 2 weeks later, or somewhere in there, there's a luncheon. And of course, we're expected to attend all these functions. And I go to this luncheon, and I'm so terrified. I don't even know how I'm going to talk to these ladies because they're all educated and I'm not. And you know what? I'm still not. I still don't have a college education. But I've learned some honesty about myself instead of self-pity. And that is, I've always wanted those letters after my name. The problem is I've just never wanted to go to school. So I know what happens is that you can be and do anything you want to be and do in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I sponsor a woman who had a 9th grade education. She got her GED, she went to college, and now she is an attorney. I mean, she's smart. And I just, and I watch people in Alcoholics Anonymous do these things all the time. But for whatever reason, I just could never muster up the ambition to do that. So today it's not, poor Polly. She doesn't have an education. Well, she just didn't want one, that's what, and didn't want to do the work. So we got to get a little honest about it today. At any rate, I go to this luncheon, and they've got one of these big fountains. I don't even know if they do this anymore. But it was full of sherry, and you just kind of put your glass up under the fountain. And so I put my glass up under the fountain, and I took a drink. Now, I had been told that people who drink were bad, because I grew up in thou shalt not drink. And these people were not bad. These were good people. And I took a drink of alcohol. And I'm here to tell you nothing great happened. Dave didn't say it last night, but he says, when he took a drink of alcohol, all of a sudden he was 6 foot tall. He was 6 foot tall. His red hair turned brown, and his freckles fell off. None of that didn't happen for me. That's not what happened. I took a drink of alcohol, and I could just breathe. It just seemed like I could just take a breath. And I felt like I had been holding my breath for 18 years. And I took a drink of alcohol, and I could breathe. And I had no idea what alcohol was doing to me. Everybody was telling me what alcohol was doing to me. But what they never understood was what alcohol did for me. And what alcohol did is it allowed me to take a breath. It allowed me to laugh in the right places, to nod my head in the right places, to be in social situations which so terrified me that I felt like I couldn't function. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in the doctor's opinion, when I read that, I just knew at that moment what alcohol had done for me. And that was, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that alcohol gave me that feeling of ease and comfort. That's all I wanted. I wasn't trying to get drunk. I didn't want to make a fool of myself. I just wanted the anxiety to stop, to just stop. And when I took a drink, that's what happened. Along about 1962, we ended up in a place called Loring Air Force Base. And this Air Force Base is at the very tippy top of Maine. And I am 20 years old. And I have 2 children. And these 2 little boys, I have not a clue how to be a parent. I don't know how to be a parent. And I become everything that I saw in my father. Angry, rageful, little babies made me crazy. I mean, I couldn't stand the crying. I was just overwhelmed with these little babies. And we were stationed in this Air Force base, and I was having a nervous breakdown every 20 minutes. I did not know what to do with these little babies. And what happened was I ended up going to an Air Force doctor, and he said, take these. And from 1962 until 1977, when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I took Librium and Valium and Seconal and Nimutol and drank alcohol. And if you take those kind of drugs and drink alcohol, you're not an active alcoholic. You talk about Dave and I being opposites. He's taking all that speed to drink that alcohol, you know, and all I want is out. I just want out. I am incapable of suiting up and showing up for life. I just can't do life. Life is too hard for me. I just can't do life. And I would say this because it's true, but I'm a couch potato alcoholic. I did my dying on my living room sofa. I just watched soap operas and listened to Joan Baez sing the blues. And, you know, I want some of these, you know, I wanted a really, when I came into AA, I didn't realize that that was just not a good thing to be. I mean, if, you know, in AA, the badder you are, the more you do, the better it is, you know. And I wanted a really good story. You know, I sponsor a woman who slept with a one-legged preacher. You know, I wanted to do stuff like that. I mean, you know, I wanted to have, you know, all this stuff happen, you know, while you're drinking. But unfortunately for me, I get sober and I have all my affairs sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. That ain't funny. You know, that's not the way you do it. You do it when you're drinking. And at any rate, I could not, what happened for me is that I became a woman who was incapable of taking care of her children. I am an alcoholic mom, and I am a woman who never, ever should have been allowed to keep her children because I am a child abuser in every way. My husband was gone for years at a time, and I was responsible for the raising of our 2 children, and I was incapable of doing that. Those of you in Rhode Island who know Jack Gallagher have heard of a man named Frank Honeycutt, and Frank's how I met Jack. And but I met Frank Honeycutt when I was first sober, because Frank sponsored a man that sponsored me. And there's a meeting that was started in Los Angeles for Frank Fitzpatrick, who's now in the big meeting in the sky as well, and called Icebreakers. And they started that meeting because Frank had been a priest in the Navy and a captain. And it was very difficult for him to go to meetings. And so I had Frank Honeycutt, and his sponsee was my sponsor. And my first sponsor was a man. And I know that a lot of times we say, you know, women sponsor women and men sponsor men, and I really do agree with that, but that's not in the big book. And I had my first AA sponsor was a man. And what I believe today is God gives us everything we need. And we get to have the exact right person who gets to sponsor us. And Frank was my sponsor. And I am so grateful that Frank did not give me watered down AA. Frank loved me, and he told me the truth. And he looked at me after I finished a 5th step with him, and he said, "Polly, you are a child abuser. And you are going to go to those boys, and you're going to make amends." And I did not know how, I just didn't, I was so terrified, and I was so ashamed, and I was so humiliated, and I didn't know if there was any way I could even stay sober when I became aware of what kind of mother I had been. Now, I believe that the disease of alcoholism is a family disease, and that anyone who lives with a practicing alcoholic is affected by the disease of alcoholism. And my sons were deeply affected by the disease of alcoholism. And when I got sober, I went to my sons And after Frank had told me, you're going to go make amends to these boys. And I made amends to my sons. And then he said, you're going to ask them if there's anything they need to say to you. And whatever they say, you're not going to, these are the words you're going to say back. I am so sorry that that happened to you, and I will spend the rest of my life being the very best mom I can be. He says, you don't get to say, well, I'm sober now, you shouldn't feel that way. You're going to spend the rest of your life being the very best mom you can be. Now, in the family afterwards, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says there that the head of the household caused most of the problems. Well, we know the head of the household they thought was men then, and that was the alcoholic. And it says that we will not even the score in this lifetime. So, you know, it's not up to my kids to be good to me. That's not their job. It's up to me to be the very best mom I can be. That's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. And that's what Frank told me that I would do for the rest of my days. Now, I'm very blessed because I have a son who's 26 years sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Dave and I, driving up here, he had just spoke in Wisconsin. And so he sent the tape. And James speaks quite a bit, and I've heard him speak a lot. And he's a fabulous, fabulous member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But he talks about being a child of an alcoholic. And one of the things, I think he does it to get a laugh, but it's really true. He talks about how he's heard me talk hundreds of times. And he says, no matter how many times I've heard her talk, she never makes it sound as bad as it really was. And so, and I'm sure, you know, that's true. There's probably no way we could possibly do that. But I just want to tell you, he tells a story about how he lived in a state of altered reality, which is what happens to people who are born into alcoholic families. In order to survive, they live in an altered state of reality. And James talks about being a little boy, maybe around 10 years old. Now, I can no longer put my children to bed at night, and I can no longer get them up in the morning. I am incapable of doing that. And my sons have to get themselves up and get ready and go to school because their mother is incapable of doing that. And so what happens is James wakes up this morning and he goes into the kitchen, and what the scene, as he says, as he sees it, is his mother passed out on the kitchen floor with a drink spilt. And he says, what he does is he steps over me, he gets his cereal bowl, his cereal, the milk, puts it together, puts it all back in the cabinet, steps back over me, sits down at the kitchen table, and I'm laying here and the table's here, and eats his cereal and feels nothing. And that's the disease of alcoholism. And my children have paid a terrible price for the disease of alcoholism. And I know that I'm not responsible for their alcoholism. I know that I did not pour any drinks down them. But for whatever reason, I sent a message to those two little boys, well, for whatever reason, because of a disease called alcoholism. And I love what Margot, I think it was Margot who said it this afternoon, who said, you know, with the information I had, I was doing the best I could. If I had known better, I'd have done better. And that's the truth. It was the best I could do because I was an alcoholic. And what happened is they paid a terrible price for that. And they have had, you know, the low self-esteem, the suicidal thoughts, all the stuff that come from kids is what happened. The other scene with my oldest son is when you take all those pills and you drink alcohol, we don't breathe very well. We breathe really shallow. And many is the time I've come to with my son taking me and shaking me and said, Mom, wake up, are you dead? and me to come to and see the fear in his eyes. And you know, for 32 years, I haven't had to come to and see that kind of fear in anybody's eyes because of something I'm doing. And for that, I've been overpaid in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm just going to tell you about I'm going to just tell you about a few things that brought me to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is, I had a car wreck in Irving, Texas, right where the Dallas Cowboys play football. And I called, Dave kind of told the story, got the sequences a little mixed up. The story was true, but the sequences were a little mixed up. And what happened is that I ended up wrecking my automobile, getting out of my car, and going and calling the police and telling them that my car had been stolen. And here comes the police with my husband, and I'm taken to the Irving police station. And I get to see that look in the non-alcoholic's face who just doesn't understand why we do the things we do. And this policeman looked at my husband with so much disgust, and he says, "Why don't you just take her home and sober her up?" And on the way home, my husband said to me, he says, "Polly, there's a treatment center, and it's not far from our house, and I wish you would go." And that night I entered treatment for the first time. Now this was no fancy jitter joint. This was a county detox. And it was a 7-day county detox. And we got in there and they started taking us to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I loved AA. I loved the laughter. I just loved it. I loved the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. But there was just something down inside of me that just said, "Polly, people like you don't become alcoholic." And as Dave said last night, he says, you know, an alcoholic can lay in the gutter feeling superior to those looking down on him. And here I was. People like me don't become alcoholic. And while I was in that treatment center, I had a jitter house romance. You know, where sick falls in love with sick and you walk off into happy destiny. Well, we walked off into happy destiny for 52 days or 58 days. And I was brought back, and then Frank 12-stepped me out of a motel room in Euless, Texas. And I was brought back into that treatment center more dead than alive. And I'd reached that place in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that talks about pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, because I had been beaten up and numerous and sundry other things. And I knew that there was no way I could stay sober. I knew that I couldn't stay sober with what had happened in that motel room. I couldn't stay sober with the kind of mom I'd become, or the kind of wife I'd become, or the kind of daughter I'd become. And I've heard in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that men hate what they've done and women hate what they have become. And I hated what I had become. And I knew that I could not live sober in my own skin. And you see, I didn't know anything about AA. I didn't know anything about the steps or the traditions or the concepts. I didn't know that these things were what was going to allow me to live in my own skin, no matter what kind of an alcoholic I was. I didn't understand that. And so what happened for me was that I just bided time for that 7 days, because I knew there was no way I could live sober. And what happened is I left that treatment center, and I got a bottle of scotch, and I got a bottle of Valium, and I checked into a motel. Now, I don't believe that there's anybody in this room that doesn't have an angel in your life, someone that leads us to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had such a woman in my life. And I worked with her, and she knew nothing about the disease of alcoholism, but she loved me. And she said this day that something came over her. And today I know that something was God working in my life through her. And she drove around until she found my car parked outside this motel. And the door hadn't latched. I had just closed it. And she pushed it open, and she found me laying there. And on April the 8th of 1977, I was court committed to a hospital in Bedford, Texas. And I wasn't court committed, sorry about that. I was pronounced dead on arrival in a hospital in Bedford, Texas. And what happens is in 1977, it's not a lot different than it was in 2009, the state of Texas did not take kindly to people who try to take their life. And so what happened was is I got put on one of those little 72-hour holds in a psychiatric hospital, which was enough time for my husband to obtain a court order from a Fort Worth judge that said I was a detriment to myself and others, and I was court committed to a treatment center in Dallas, Texas. And I did say to him on the way to treatment, which is so true, well, if this is the last drink I'm ever going to take, looks to me like I ought to be able to drink on the way to treatment. And he stopped, got a bottle, and just said, suck on this. I mean, he was disgusted, absolutely disgusted. And I entered treatment on April the 11th of 1977. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that if we stay spiritually fit, on page 164 in A Vision for You, that if we stay spiritually fit, that great events will come to pass. That's the great fact for us. It's a fact that great events will come to pass. And I've got about 20 minutes, and I'm going to try to give you in that 20 minutes the great events that have come to pass in my life. Because I want you to know that for 32 years, my life has been in session. And I've heard people say, well, life's not a rose garden. I think a life is a rose garden. I think that's just exactly what it is. A lot of beautiful flowers with some thorns mixed in there. I think that's life. And my life has been a rose garden. And I'd just like to share that with you and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I came out of that treatment center, and I asked Frank to be my sponsor. And he began to take me through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he started, one of the first things he said is, you're going to get active in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. But see, he had Frank Honeycutt for a sponsor, so he was active in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, you're going to get active. And he says, and if you have 5 more minutes sobriety than the newcomer who walks through that door, you share that 5 minutes with them. And you get busy making coffee and washing ashtrays and doing all the stuff that we do in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got active in the rooms. I got active doing what we do in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I come from Texas, where we do the steps quickly, and because we do them much like Dr. Bob and Earl Treat's story in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, when he talks about Dr. Bob taking him through the steps in an afternoon. And we went through the steps quickly because, see, the deal is to get through the steps so I can start working with another alcoholic. Because that's the deal. The way we stay sober here is one alcoholic sharing with another alcoholic. That's the huge miracle of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, is one alcoholic sharing with another alcoholic. And I got busy in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I also had this low self-worth. And I just wanted you to love me. I'm also in the rooms of Al-Anon, and my Al-Anon sponsor's husband, who was in AA, he's dead today. But Albert used to say, I'm addicted to approval. Well, man, I'm addicted to approval. And I just wanted you to love me, and I nearly sold my soul for that. Sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was so desperate for you to love me. And what happened is I had to hit a bottom sober behind relationships and sex. Because I just knew that if you just loved me enough, that I'd be okay. And today, it's really important to me how I behave in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because you see, I believe what our preamble says, that this is a program of attraction. Now, my first 3 years sober, I was not a program of attraction. Now, maybe it depends on what your attraction was, but I used to show up at meetings. I mean, today, with the way, some of the women dress, believe me, you had nothing on us in the 70s, because I had long red hair, and I'd put it in 2 ponytails like Daisy May, and we'd wear these cropped off tops, and then these hip hugger jeans cut off and frayed, and some newcomer would come in the room and say, "Hi, welcome to AA," and I want you. And I was not a program of attraction. And today, I know it's no big deal today because I'm 69 years old, but I wasn't always this old. And it's important to me to behave like a sober woman in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, a sober married woman. I want to be an attraction to this program, and how I behave in these rooms is important. And today, I want to be an attraction to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to behave like a sober married woman. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I was taught those things, and I was given the tools and how to act in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, even though I had to hurt myself so badly. When I was 3 years sober, I've known Dave since I was 6 months sober, and we were AA buddies. Now, Dave sponsored a lot of the men that I had that I was friendly with in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, Dave knew more about me than he needed to. And, but we were just AA buds. And that's what we were, just AA friends for 3 years. And when I was 3.5 years sober and Dave was 4.5 years sober, he said to me, he said, "Polly, I'm in love with you, but you need to get something straight. I don't want to have an affair with you. I want to marry you." And things like that aren't supposed to happen to people like me. And Dave and I often say if we'd have known we were going to get married because we were really good friends, we'd have never told each other the things we told each other. But this program has given us a life beyond our greatest expectation. This year in October, God willing and the creek don't rise, Dave and I'll be married 30 years. And that's a great event that's come to pass. And, we're 2 alcoholics hooked up together, so some days it's what an order, I can't go through with it. But it's, we both love this program. And when Dave and I got married, we both knew how to take a hostage, but we didn't know how to have a marriage. And we wanted to stay married and didn't know how to do that. Now, I'm Dave's 4th wife. And as our Al-Anon friend likes to say to Dave, "Dave, you're the only common thread in all those marriages." So Dave liked to marry and divorce. And I was married for 22 years, so I suffer. And but neither one of us knew how to do this. And my AA sponsor had been a priest. And when his mother died, he had been a priest for his mother. And when she died, he married this woman that he'd loved all his life. And I loved what Frank and Oroko had. I loved what they had. And Frank said, "Well, Polly," he says, "you and Dave can have that if you'll plant yourself firmly in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, like 2 oak trees, and you nurture yourself with the steps and the traditions and the concepts. You'll grow strong in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous." And he said, "Just like the oak trees, you'll look up one day and you can't tell where one begins and the other one ends." And I'm also in the Rooms of Al-Anon, and I have an Al-Anon sponsor. And before, she was almost married 50 years before Albert died. And Sally and I would go to AA and Al-Anon women's retreats that we'd have all the time in Texas. And we'd get there, and she'd open up her suitcase, and she'd have all these little love notes in her suitcase. And I wanted what she had. I wanted to have a marriage, and I wanted romance in my marriage. I wanted to have that. And what happened is Albert said, well, Polly, you can have that, but there's some magic words. And those words are, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you. And he also said, you don't even have to be the one who's wrong to say you're sorry. Just say you're sorry and get the communication going. And Frank Honeycutt, who used to say his big deal was, he'd always say, chicken. He called all the women chicken. He called all the men partner. He'd say, chicken, what do you want? You want to be do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? So just say you're sorry and get on with it. Just say you're sorry. Because what happens, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says we make amends whether they're real or fancied. So just go for it. And then we met this couple down in Omaha, and they taught us how to work the traditions in our relationship. And Dave and I have been following that advice for almost 30 years. And I'm here to tell you, standing here tonight, I still think he's the cutest guy in the room. I love him more today than I did almost 30 years ago. And I am so grateful that I have the privilege of being able to have the marriage that I've had in the Rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dave and I have, as my AA sponsor Dottie likes to say, life gives us many opportunities to grow. And I've watched my AA sponsor walk through so much adversity in her life and her 46 years sober in the Rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that life is just life. And just because we're sober, just because we're doing the right thing, doesn't mean that life's not going to do life. That's just the way life is. And Dave and I have had those opportunities. We got married. He had 2 kids. I had 2 kids. You know, what an order. Put them 4 kids together. And if anybody's done that, you know what I'm talking about. And that was a challenge. And at the time, 3 of our children were alcoholics and drug addicts, and one of them was having a lot of emotional and mental problems. And today, all 4 of them are alcoholics. And Dave and I had there was a lot going on with these kids. And then Dave and I had the opportunity to move to Southern California, and we were there, and life was in session, and things were going on, and it was fun, and we were doing the AA deal, and here we are. We're 16 and 17 years sober, and it's like life could not get better than this. And then what happened was, in the early 90s, is when the bottom fell out of the economy, just kind of like it is now. And the bottom fell out of aerospace in Southern California. And people were laid off everywhere. And Dave was laid off his job. Now, we didn't think that that would be a really big deal, because Dave is a computer scientist, and, you know, headhunters were always calling. But what we learned at that time is that nobody was looking for a 57-year-old computer scientist. And Dave would not work again for 2 years in his field. He had 2 minimum wage jobs, and that's what happened. So what happened for us is we ended up losing our home and filing bankruptcy. And I was so humiliated by what was happening. And I didn't want anybody to know, because, you know, they're going to say, what step are you working if if these things are happening to you? And Dave and I were what you might call high profile in AA, because we were busy doing Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's what we love to do. And California is nothing but speaker meetings, so you speak everywhere. Well, they have other meetings, I don't mean, but a lot of speaker meetings. And I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to tell the truth. And my AA sponsor would say, Polly, you have to get up and tell the truth, because your past is your greatest asset. And people need to know that you can do these things sober. You can do these things sober. And I'd look at Frank Honeycutt and I'd say, but Frank, what are people going to think of me? And he'd just look at you and he'd say, Polly, it's none of your business what people think of you, but your very life depends what you think of them. You know, I can't afford to have a resentment for any one of you. And this beautiful man taught me that. He taught me. I never saw, after Frank had died, these two Franks in my life get confusing, but after Frank Honeycutt had died, I was speaking with a woman from L.A., and Dave and I had already moved to Washington, and she says, you know, I have never known of a single other person who has, other than Frank Honeycutt, who no one ever said a bad word about. Can you imagine having that kind? And this is the man who taught me that kind of love, who taught me you just do for other people. And Chuck C. used to say, you know, my life is none of my business. That's God's business, is to take care of me. And a new pair of glasses, if you listen to that or you read the book, listen to the tapes or read the book, Chuck says, you know, that's God's business. My business is being a servant to God's kids. That's what my business is. But taking care of me is God's business. And all of those things were being said, and you know, things look like the worst they could possibly be. Here we're going to file bankruptcy, and we're sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our homes being taken away from us. And Dave looked at me one night as we were heading for a meeting, and he says, you know, Polly, Janis Joplin sang a song, and Chris Christopherson wrote it, talked about freedoms having nothing left to lose. And he says, you know, that's what's going to happen with us. He said, we have God, we have AA, and we have each other. And as long as we have that, we're going to be fine. And Dave and I make sure we know that we're third. It's God and AA, and then we're third. And that's the way that it is. And I'm so grateful for that. And we did fine. And it's, you know, you live through all of that, and you stay sober, and you help other people, and you just keep on keeping on. I get the opportunity to sponsor women in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am a woman who has suffered grave depressions in and out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would get everything I could find on Bill W. and read it, because I had suffered depression. And what I have found an antidote for depression, and that is work with others. Because as long as I'm working with these women, I'm not thinking about me. You know, I don't have a clue what I do for them. I don't have a clue. All I know is I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't have the privilege to work with other women. They saved my life. When I was 6.5 years sober, my youngest son called me on the phone, and he said, Mom, I want what you have. And 6.5 years before, I was supposed to attend a function at his school. And he said, don't you dare show up at my school, because I am ashamed of you. And 6.5 years later, he wants what I have. A great event that's come to pass. James and Kelly got married, and they had 3 kids. And Kelly's also in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our firstborn grandson was born deaf. And I'm telling you, I had my fist at God. How could this happen to me? You know, here these people have babies all the time, and they don't even want them. And their babies are born perfect, and our baby's born deaf. But see, one more time, my perception of reality was distorted, because I had no idea what God had in store. And what happened because of Ryan is our whole family went and we learned to sign. And I've had the privilege of being able to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to some deaf women. See, we never know what happens. We never know how God's going to use anything. And I want you to know, May 23rd, Ryan will turn 17 years old. And he's going to get his driver's license this month, which is really frightening. And but I want you to know, because of what you have done, because of what you have done for James and Kelly, because they are members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you've taught them to be relieved of the bondage of self, that this little boy is handicapped in no way. He has been totally integrated into public school. And you know, I used to think I was different. Oh, I'm so different. You know, poor me. You know, Ryan he's in a deaf school right now. He's spending the last 2 years in a deaf school. But he was in Evanston High School on the North Shore of Chicago. And that school is 4,400 children. And Ryan was the only deaf child in that school, going to class with an interpreter. Now, he didn't feel different. He was different. And he showed up and suited up every single day. What he's taught me. And we have Ryan, we have Chris and Maddie. My oldest son has two daughters. And I want you to know, I am a mother who abused her children. But I want you to know today, I am a dynamite grandma. And I am so much fun. And I'm one of these guys, I love roller coasters. And my grandkids love roller coasters. And we go and re-ride roller coasters, and then we get off, and then we go stand in line again. And my granddaughter Katie, in January, I took him to Disneyland and to Knott's Berry Farm. We were riding roller coasters, and Katie said, "You know, Grandma, my friends' grandmas just don't do what you do." And I thought, your friends' grandmas are probably grown up. Your grandma isn't. The only way I know I'm this old is if I pass a mirror and think, oh my God, who is that person? You know, where did the other one go? Life is so good today, and the things that I get to do, and the life that I get to lead, just because I drank too much whiskey. I get to come to Rhode Island and be a part of your conference because I drank too much whiskey. God is so good to give us the life that He has given us. Dave and I retired 6 years ago, and we moved to the most northwestern corner of the United States at a little place called Birch Bay. And we bought this house. We didn't buy the house. We bought the property, and Dave supervised the building of it. And I was still in Southern California, and I still was working. And we have this house that looks out over the ocean. And we got 3 shag trees, and eagles sit in those trees. And we live in paradise. Absolutely live in paradise. And you know, in 1993, they took our house. And today, we have this house. And, you know, if we can't afford it and something happens, it'll be okay if we have to give it up. You know, we've done this before. That'll be okay. It's all right. Because I know that everything is in perfect order. Sometimes it doesn't seem like that. Sometimes life gives us, something that happens, like Dave's son dying at age 42, and car wrecks and all this stuff, and these tragedies happen, and we want to ask why. And there's just no answers to why. All I know is that God's in charge, and He's totally and completely awesome. And my friend Patrick said, I always say, God's got my back. You know, God's got my back. And Patrick said, yeah, He's got your front too, because He just keeps clearing it away and making it easier. And I love that. I'm going to say it a couple of more times, and your name don't get on it. It's mine. But I love that, because He does. He clears the way and makes whatever's going on, it's going to be just like it needs to be. And today, we get to live in this house, and we get to live in paradise. And I am so grateful that I'm an alcoholic. I am so grateful for the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm so grateful for such an awesome God. And Frank Fitzpatrick used to say something that I loved, and he used to say, I sought my God I could not see. I sought my soul eluded me. I sought my brother, and I found all three. God bless you. I love you.